I think we can begin now. So I would give the floor to Sheila to make a presentation. And that's it. If Goncalo comes up, we will continue with Goncalo and then open the debate with the students. Sheila, please, thank you very much once again, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's a great honor to be part of this summer school. And I mean, it's such an important topic, economics education, and I can really see what Jay's talking about fitting into a discussion of that very, very constructively. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. So if you can just bear with me. It's not working.
Now it's working.
No.
We have again this message. Okay. Now we can see it.
Yeah, are we okay? Good, excellent. Right, yes, one has to learn many skills in an economics education now, including not having thumbnails that cover your text. I forgot about that. Right, okay, so the title I chose was Economics Education for the Real World. And the reason for that is that it may seem obvious that when we're learning economics, what we want to learn about is the real world, about the economy and how to make it a better place. But when you look at some of the way in which economics is taught, it's not clear that what one is talking about is the real world. Let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. And one of the main points I want to try and get across is that how we understand the real world determines how we teach it. So I'm not trying to persuade you of any sort of particular school of thought within economics, although I should be explicit about this, and this is the kind of thing which I think is important that we are explicit, that I'm a post-Keynesian economist. But I'm approaching the question of education in the interests of students being exposed to a whole range of ways of approaching economics in order to form your own views about this. So we're interested in a very complex socio-economic system, and goodness knows there are so many crises in the modern economy. There are so many urgent issues that understanding what's going on and bringing together different understandings is so critical. And so when we're thinking about education, the question is how best to equip ourselves to understand this situation. Now, the crisis in 2008, the financial crisis, was quite a catalyst. It sparked off a rejuvenation of arguments that had been going on for many decades about the problems with mainstream economics. But at the same time, there was an upswelling of concern among students who very understandably were distressed because what they were being taught didn't help them understand the crisis, and in most cases didn't actually mention crisis at all. And this, I mean, obviously there are all sorts of exceptions one can think of, but if you think of the standard economics curriculum, there was no room for crisis. It's a model based on the principle of equilibrium as a result of free market forces. and crisis should not happen. And the other thing which was particularly striking in the wake of the crisis was that there was no attention whatsoever to moral issues. I mean, the 2008 crisis, just like the climate crisis and the health crisis, have really brought to the fore the moral issues that surround matters which are also of concern to economics. And yet the standard curriculum stood back from that and didn't regarded moral issues as something that politicians are worried about, but not economists themselves. And this reflected the way in which economic research itself was conducted, that the standard models, as Gabrielle has been explaining, and as I'm sure you all understand, didn't address these issues. And that's why economics was taught the way it was taught. So if we think about the mainstream view and just unpack that a little bit, why was economics, and in many cases is economics, taught the way it is? Well, the mainstream view is that approach is the most scientific way of doing economics. And by scientific is meant technical, deductivist, tested against data, and that's it. The theory consists of models. A model is a theory, and therefore there's no requirement to develop capacity to argue around the model. The model is sufficient. And so increasingly over the last 4 or 5 decades, economics programs have become more and more technical. And the argument against continuing with more traditional study, as in the history of economic thought, is that there's a trade-off. That if you study history of thought, that squeezes out the technical material, which is regarded as the core. And similarly, there has been attention to other disciplines, most notably lately psychology. But the way in which these other disciplines are brought into economics is to encapsulate them within the technical framework, tweak the axioms, alter some constraints. But essentially the approach, the method is the same. And the goal is to step back from the detail of real economic contexts and try to abstractly construct theories which can then be applied to all contexts. In other words, the idea is to provide universal theories which you can then take off the shelf and apply in any particular context. So you don't have to discuss economic history. You don't have to discuss the local economy, because the focus is on the universal theories, and then it's regarded as secondary, qualifying those for application. Similarly, there's no need to discuss the history of thought, because the idea is that economics has progressed over the years. The best ideas have been developed further, bad ideas have been dropped. So there's no point in looking at what's gone on in the past. The present encapsulates everything that you need. So no history of thought. And because it's regarded as settled what constitutes science, there's no need to teach methodology either. I mean, not only is it regarded that there's nothing to discuss, but it hardly ever is discussed. It's very rarely made explicit. And yet it's so important, because this has governed the way in which generations of economists have been taught. Now, I'm going to present what I call the political economy view. And I want to make clear that this is not being dualistic, because being dualistic is a characteristic of the mainstream view. So what I want to do is present a pluralist view, which is different from the mainstream view, but includes a whole range of possibilities. So we can draw distinctions. I mean, you can't do anything without drawing distinctions, but therefore, I've thought it important to draw the distinction between the mainstream approach and others, which I've called political economy. But there are also distinctions within political economy. And just in case you wonder why I should labor that point, it's because some people argue that a political economy view is not pluralistic, it's dualistic. It's saying mainstream wrong, political economy right. And I'm just making an argument that it's good to look at the political economy view for a whole variety of reasons. But within that, there's so much other choice to make and different possibilities to pursue. And the political economy view starts where I started this presentation, which is the real world. It starts with understanding the way in which the socioeconomic system works. And the understanding is that it's too complex and it evolves in a complex way such that knowledge on the part of agents and on the part of economists ourselves is uncertain. And there's no prospect that any one theory is going to cover it all. There's a modesty about the scope for knowledge, in particular about any one theory. And this is what feeds into pluralism, the idea that we should accept the fact that there are other ways of looking at problems based on different ways of understanding reality. So within a political economy approach, formal techniques might well be used. I mean, a model is a closed system, but it doesn't, if you say that system is the theory, then you're sort of tying yourself in. But if it's just part of an argument, then it can be combined with other types of argument. So if we have a model which, I mean, for example, Keynes in the general theory assumed that money supply was given. But then if you go back to the Treatise on Money, he explained what produces the money supply. So you're not, you can put the two arguments together. The difficulty with a formal deductivist model is that if you start being concerned about assumptions and want to change them, you have to change them for the whole theoretical structure. Now, if we have allowed different forms of argument, then the question is, how do you put all of them together to build a theory? If they could all be put formally in a mathematical structure, then you're back to a formal model capturing everything. But once we allow for arguments which are not based on formal mathematics or take different starting points or different types of evidence, then we can produce a theory which is designed to address the real world as we see it. The types of argument, the methods used reflect a particular style understanding of the real world. And this is the kind of thing that differentiates different schools of thought within economics. And of course, this plurality of methods can also include material from other disciplines, that these two can be folded into the overall structure. Now, there is always the hope that we can draw out some general principles from our economic analysis. If there are no general principles, then we have to start from scratch every time when we're addressing a particular context. But I mean, we see from a variety of theories, and if we go back to Adam Smith's division of labor, this was an idea that he pulled out from detailed observation of different circumstances, and which then manifests itself differently in different circumstances. It gives us some basis on which to start an analysis. But, and what I'm about to say is so, I mean, ECLAC knows this better than any other organization, that different theories arise from different experiences. So it's not just a matter of taking a general principle and seeing how you can apply it, but new general principles can evolve out of different experiences. So dependency theory arose out of the Latin American experience, and has then, of course, been applied in other contexts. But it's an excellent case study for the way in which theory can evolve, taking account of the nature of the real subject matter. Now, how do we proceed along these lines? I mean, having a closed formal model is a lot easier in many respects. The maths may be more difficult, but in so many respects, it's easier because it doesn't require judgment in the same way as a pluralist approach to the subject matter, where you need to apply judgment. Which methods do you use? How do you put them together? How do you assess arguments? How do you relate them to a particular context? And this is something, I mean, what is judgment? How do you acquire it? Well, education is and experience are core to this process. And finally, from a political economy perspective, there are moral judgments embedded within economics, whether it's admitted or not. And since these are so important, particularly when we're thinking about applying economic theories, then these need to be made explicit. So this is a particular challenge when the dominant approach to economics won't accept that moral judgments are actually embedded in the theory. So what does this mean for education? Well, the first thing, and I'm not saying this happens to happen chronologically first, but the first thing I want to note is that education needs to provide a philosophical grounding, just so that we all understand what the discipline of economics is, what its architecture is. How is it made up? How do we understand the different schools within it? How do we explain a pluralist approach other than going back to a philosophical level of understanding the nature of the economy and the nature of the kind of knowledge that we can build on it? And the other thing that a philosophical grounding can provide is that it trains us in critical thinking. I mean, if we're going to be able to take on board a variety of approaches and a variety of theory, then we need to have some basis for comparing and contrasting, debating. And this is what a philosophical foundation can provide. And that allows us to understand schools of thought within economics and form a judgment about how far they fit in with our own view of the economy, for example. And it helps us to dig down and work out what the moral underpinnings are of any theoretical approach. And I mentioned debate. I mean, the debate was one of the first things that the students in Paris brought to the fore the post-statistic movement around 2000. I can't remember the exact date when they started. But they were demanding that they be taught by means of debate, because this is a way of practicing arguments. And we all know when we debate with each other informally about politics or anything really, that you try out different arguments, see how they work. You might change your mind if the other person's arguing very effectively. You might take on some of their ideas, but whatever, you should end up with a much more confident stance on one's own set of opinions. And of course, I mean, a political economy approach to education doesn't mean to say you become a political economist. I mean, you can go through this process and decide that really you think mainstream economics is the way to go. Well, that's fine. But what this approach to education would do is require the capacity to present arguments in favor of your own position and to be able to understand better what that position involves. So further, what do we want from a political economy education? Well, I would say one of the most important things, again, going back to stressing the real economy connection for education, is that there needs to be a material such that students understand their local economy and other economies, in order to again, as in debate, to see what the important differences are, and also the global economy, of course, if we're looking at global economic issues. So starting from the local economy, if somebody's thinking of getting into the policy arena, then it's going to be really important to understand which theories might be most applicable to the local economy, given their understanding of those conditions, whether they need to be adapted in any way, or if new theories need to be developed to deal with the local situation. I mean, again, Latin American economic history is full of examples of theories being applied which were developed elsewhere, which arguably did not fit the local economy. And these were theories that were developed, as I've explained, along the lines that economics is designed to produce universal theories. But you know, as you know, there has been a tremendous body of work designed as an alternative to address the problems of the local economy. Further, and this is something that I think is particularly important within the development field. I think development economics confronts the real world much more directly and inescapably than other fields within economics. And this involves addressing the complexity and evolving nature of the socioeconomic system, and that really benefits from drawing material in from other disciplines like sociology or agricultural economics or climate science, the whole range of possibilities. But from a political economy approach, since it's a pluralist approach, there isn't a requirement to sort of cram all these other disciplines into the same framework as economics. It's more a matter of adding new strands of argument and new ways of looking at things, which really enhances political economy. And of course, as part of this political economy education, as Jay has been advocating, it's important to recognize that there is a whole body of work in economics that has led us up to this date. And there should be no presumption that anything from the past is by definition inferior to anything we have just now. And in many cases, economics, we could argue, has taken wrong turnings. So we can look at the history of thought in order to get ideas from contexts in history. And also just to learn how economists, particularly great economists from the past, like Smith and Marx and Keynes, developed new ideas in order to address the real urgent economic problems as they saw it. I mean, Smith's methodology was the Newtonian methodology to sort of gather as much as he could from economic history and history of ideas in order to draw out general principles. And this would be an application of the same methodology for us, and which is something which I think is becoming more appealing in the discipline, that there is more teaching of history of thought than there used to be, which is fortunate because it's teaching the new teachers of economics. So as a transitional stage, I think it's going to be the case that there will have to be some specialist history of thought and methodology teaching, because it's been outside the curriculum for so long. But the ideal actually would be that everything was taught referring back to history of ideas where relevant, talking consciously about choice of methods, about philosophical issues, all as part and parcel of the teaching of theories. And I talk about these things from personal experience. This was how I was taught political economy many years ago. And, you know, it was an approach which worked. And it's an approach which I'm very confident is going to become more and more part of curriculum design within economics. A lot of it due to the fine efforts of students, of student organizations, and INET and YSI, of course, in terms of providing materials and a framework and a structure within which to do this. So I'm optimistic, but it means that you guys have to keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think certainly there are many questions that arise from what we heard, and we will have the opportunity to have a debate with the students later. I would invite first Goncalo. First of all, thank you, Goncalo, for being with us. Welcome to the ECLAC school. And I will give you the floor for your presentation. The idea is to have a 30-minute presentation, and then post-presentations will be discussed or commented, and questions will certainly be put forward by the students for the two presentations. Thank you, Goncalo. The floor is yours.
Thank you. You can hear me. Thank you so very much. This is very interesting, and it's great to see this discussion happening. I really don't have anything really to improve upon Professor Dow's presentation, because I did a brilliant job. But just maybe pursuing some of the points that she made. in a little bit more detail from an experience of what the difficulty, why we are where we are today, a little how we ended up the way we are today. The Institute and maybe thinking, how we can move forward from the position we're in. Now, the Institute for New Economic Thinking is dedicated to the mission of reforming the way economics is researched and taught. And if economics, which is our objective, is to become more realistic, more innovative, more pluralistic, more connected to and representative of social concerns, it needs to be taught that way. But economics is not taught that way. And the way economics programs are currently designed sort of militates against it. So, and if you consider the journey of a student who's entering economics today, in the three levels of, and sort of break it down to three levels that they go through, sort of as a beginning student of economics in the first year in a principles course, and then as they move along to an undergraduate economics major, the upper level courses, and then finally to the graduate, master's, and PhD levels, what do they see? Well, they start off being presented a very small set of basic economic models at the beginning. And these basic economic models are supposed to cover everything. So we're talking supply and demand, aggregate supply and demand, and aggregate demand, maybe ISLM. You don't get too many alternative approaches at the beginning stages. You don't get time to really explore debates or wider areas. But maybe that's a bit fair enough. In a first year course or in a beginning course, time is limited. You can't cover everything. So maybe there is some hope that in the second year, there is more time to be exposed to more alternative approaches or explore debates in wider areas. But no. And this is where the surprise comes to a student after they go through their first year, that the second and third year, you see the same models again. The same ones you already saw in your first year, just with a slightly more technical sophistication. This keeps going that way. At the MA level, at the PhD level, it's still the same models, it's still the same approaches, just more technical at every level. So the way conventional economics programs are constructed is just linearly. And you'd hope they'd be more of a cone where you start maybe with a narrow base and then you widen, but it never widens. It just stays narrow all the way through. Again, just cranking up the degree of technical sophistication at every additional education level. Additional years do not expose students to new models or new topics, but revisit the same models. And what are the consequences of this? What is the message that's sort of being delivered by this approach? Well, there are three messages that students are taking away from this. The first is that there is only one set of models that can be applied to everything. The second point is that there's no debate about these models, that economic theory is some sort of settled topic. And the third message is that the only thing that remains, what a professional economist does, is simply applying these models to different empirical scenarios. In short, the message is that current neoclassical theory is scientific and conclusive. There's nothing more to debate. All that remains is application. This message is false. It strangles new economic thinking. It distorts the way economic education. And it's not that at some point the professor comes out and says these things. It's just the message that naturally comes out of the linear way curriculums are designed. But that's only one concept. So there is this narrowing of thinking that happens. But it's not only the narrowing of thinking, there's also a narrowing of students. So conventional economics education is not geared to expanding knowledge or encourage thinking, but to improving technical skills. And the consequences, therefore, are well known. you gradually narrow the students that stay in economics department as education advances, level by level. It drives out the kind of students we would want to retain in economics. For instance, and again, here I'm going to put three types again. Consider the critically minded student, the one who's naturally, interested in critical ideas. They're alienated immediately because they're simply told there is this set of models, accept it or leave. Well, if you're told to accept something and there's no alternative, or you don't see that there is room for debate, you leave. So economics is presented to them in a very insipid way. They're told that they must accept it. They're shown no alternative, shown no debate, shown nothing that can really engage their critical abilities. It just becomes technical drilling. Topic looks dull, topic looks insipid. So they'll drop out and go pursue subjects that seem more interesting to them or engage them intellectually. But it's not enough that economics education does not encourage critical thinking. It drives out people who could have brought critical thinking into economics. And these people are lost to the profession. And then there's a second group of people it drives out, which is the ones that are maybe less technically inclined. They came into economics because they're interested in economic issues. But they're surprised that it turns out that economics is not about the economy, it's a branch of applied mathematics. And this is not what they signed up for. I wanted to study economics, not math. And if I simply don't have the inclination to pursue math, then I'll just leave the subject entirely. So we're now driving out a second kind of person who we would have liked to hold on to, people who might have brought something to the table, who might have uncovered insights by approaching a topic from a different way or by different methods. And what are we left with? We're left with the ones that persist, the students who persist. The ones that remain, we then tell them they have to limit their curiosity. In other words, that there is no payoff to studying new topics and approaches, that you're supposed to invest your time in improving skills rather than exploring ideas or exploring new areas. You're asked to give up a mile of breadth for an inch of depth. And a professional economist's entire career is built on that inch. So, in summary, just the way we're narrowing the students in economics programs, we alienate the critically minded, we drive out the technically inclined, and we force those who remain to limit what they're curious about. So conventional economics education produces narrow-minded academic professionals in the end. And it is unsurprising that we end up with a profession with little or no imagination of how to address real-world challenges. Because this is how we've trained them to be. This is how we trained them to think. It's not their nature, it's simply just the way that these programs are designed. So if this is what I'm calling the symptoms of current economic education. And if there's a symptom, there should be an antidote of some kind. So if the goal is to encourage new, innovative, and critical thinking, then we must counter the effects of this narrowing at every level. Not merely an open course on the side or maybe an advanced course, but at every level from the beginning to the end, you should have this antidote. Students have to hear, and again, it's not about dropping the math or dropping what's taught, but it's about making sure that the message that they're walking away with is the right message. We're not stopping them from drinking the poison. We're just adding an antidote to it so they don't walk away with the wrong message. And the messages we want to deliver, I believe, are essentially three. The first, that economics is not settled, that it's more open-ended, there is room for debate. It always has been. Two, that economics is not a technique. It is a social science. It's not a branch of applied mathematics. It studies the economy, and insights can come from all sorts of approaches. And the third, and I think the most important message, is that there is no trade-off between depth and breadth. that exploring new ideas and alternative approaches produces better ideas. That you're not sacrificing something by exploring different areas, but you're actually improving what your own understanding. And these, I think, are fundamental truths of economics that need to be revealed to students at every level. It should stimulate the students that are currently in the programs to think more critically and engage with alternative and new approaches. But I also want to encourage students who are uncommitted yet to economics, the innovative and critical thinkers, and get them to stay in economics rather than abandon the field, so that as we meet them in the profession later, they are still there, that they're still engaged. Now, how do we deliver these antidotes? We can talk about curricular reform on a grand scale at courses, at the college, university courses, and that should be the long-term goal. Unfortunately, any comprehensive curricular reform is necessarily going to face a lot of institutional resistance. Partly out of hostility to the material, but mostly just out of institutional inertia. But can teachers do it on their own? You know, without waiting for a dictate from on high, this is how you have to teach it. And I guess this depends on your department, but generally speaking, I believe teachers can. They may have an obligation to deliver a certain material, but how they deliver it can be adjusted to ensure that these messages go through. So this goes back to what Professor Dow was talking about in terms of like focusing on debates and bringing debates into the story. Taking a little aside to explore the philosophical or social nature of questions. Introducing history, both economic history and the history of ideas, in the middle of courses to show how the concept has developed. Naturally, I have a specific interest in the history of thought. I believe it should always be inserted in all courses. It shouldn't be siphoned off into a separate ghetto. I also believe it shouldn't be taught in an antiquarian way. You know, these are our ancestors, let us worship them. But it should be shown vividly how economists come up with ideas, come up with concepts, come up with models, and why we are where we are right now. And how will students receive this? In my experience, I think they'll receive it well. Remember, students are very naturally curious people, lazy, but curious. And it takes many years to beat that curiosity out of them. They're also more socially engaged and have interest. So a little bit of controversy, a little bit of debate, a little more embedding engages their attention better and makes them more insightful about their own studies, but also more eager to pursue things further. When a student realizes economics is more open-ended, once they're shown how new ideas arise, how they are debated, why models are what they are, it gives them a deeper understanding of the topic, and it inspires. Because now you see that a field has an opening. Hey, maybe I can contribute something too. So it might be worth continuing in the field rather than turning my back on it. The problem is time. Teachers, of course, are busy focusing on research publications, trying to reach that tenure, and simply don't have enough time to design their courses in innovative ways. Teachers have a tendency to teach the topic as they were taught it. Even heterodox teachers who should know better often teach straight out of the textbook simply because they haven't figured out how to bring alternative material into a standard course. And this is where I want to call on sort of the older and more experienced teachers who have tried by trial and error over time, figured out how to introduce topics in innovative ways, how to design courses to help out the younger teachers. You know, for the teachers who know how to have this experience of how to teach political economy in a certain way with certain types of models can show younger teachers how to do it, because the younger teachers simply do not know how. and don't have time to research and design it necessarily. So I think this would be an instrumental task, I think, for moving forward. The Institute of Economic Thinking education program, one of the things we are developing is trying to set up an online platform where precisely this can happen, where teachers can share teaching material. If you design a new way of teaching a trade course, or design a new way of teaching a macroeconomics course, and you can share your methods with other teachers. And so other teachers can draw from your experience and design their courses, which they don't have time to rethink the whole thing, but they can see by your example, they can see by your methods of how to do it. Because I'm here, I'm talking now with ECLAC, I mean, one of my temptations is also to talk about, my own experience when I've tried to design courses. A couple of years ago, I decided to teach an international trade course entirely from a historical perspective. So it was his economic history and history of economic thought course, but it was also an international trade course. And it was done with all the math in it. So it was just done differently. And it was very, from what the reception I received from it, it was very engaging to students. Students understood models in a way that they hadn't understood them it's in a different way. Like if they would understand, they'd get all the equipment of Heckscher Lynn, they'd get all the equipment of all the Stolper Samuelson stuff, but now they understood why it was done that way. And they could move the approach, and we moved all the way to dependency theory and Prebisch and Fortalo and all that, and they saw the whole development of trade theory over time, and how it developed over time, and what it was responding to, and how it responded to the real world that was going on, and the innovations that were coming in. So that was just one thing I tried, and I believe it worked out well. But I'd like to be able to share that method also with other teachers who might be interested in teaching a trade course from a historical perspective. Or so this is the kind of, I think, effort I think teachers have to make among themselves of, instead of arguing with their administrations, this is that the curricular reform and new textbooks, just start designing your courses in a way where the material is taught, but taught in a way that where you have that power of how to teach it, to make sure that those antidotes are there, that the students do see that things have debates, see things are open-ended, do see how economics is constructed, and maybe inspires them to stay and inspires them to continue in the field. That's mainly my main message I just wanted to bring here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Goncalo. Interesting presentation, and it is also very interesting to know how to try to somehow circumvent the barriers that teachers find in order to give a more pluralist course, and introducing economic history and the history of economic thought in their teaching. So I will open the floor to questions. I would ask students and colleagues who are accompanying us to place the questions in the chat so that I can read them and transmit it to our speakers. Please, if you have questions, don't hesitate. You can write them in English or in Spanish. You will find a very imperfect translation given by myself, so feel free and safe to write in Spanish if you prefer to do so. So I have a couple of questions just to break the ice. I know that this is a bad excuse for using my condition of moderator of the seminar to make the questions that I'm curious about. But just to give time for the rest of of the participants to ask questions. My first question is that I think that it's important that any one of us, when teaching economics, try to individually teachers to include these new approaches and new perspectives on economics. But I think it could be also extremely important to see if we can have some common program among teachers in order to encourage a coordinated effort to change the education of the economists. And I think that, Goncalo, you are doing a job in this particular aspect from INET. And so it's a question for both of you, but the question is, if you think that core project could be somehow the necessary or an adequate first move in order to try to build a common program among economists aimed at changing the way economics is taught. I understand that the book Core has produced is somehow limited because it has been able to include some parts of heterodox thinking, but of course not all. But maybe it would be a start to try to change in a coordinated way the thinking of economy. Second question for both of the presenters is what can we do? What we can do with power? I mean, it's so institutionalized and it's so powerful the control of orthodox economists of economic teaching that sometimes you find power barrier much more stronger than the intellectual barriers to to change the education of economy. And if you have any view on this part of the problem of changing the education of the economy. I stop here and don't see any questions in the chat, so I leave you, Sheila and Goncalo, with two initiatives.
Oh, well, thank you. Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Were you inviting us to respond just now?
Sorry?
I couldn't hear you very clearly. Were you inviting us to respond?
Okay. I know the question is, what about the core project? How you feel if it can be the beginning of a coordinated effort to change the education of economists? And also your views about the power asymmetry that we have in economics.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be happy to pass the question about core to Goncalo, because Goncalo, beg your pardon, since he's more closely connected with it. On the question of power, I mean, this is an endemic problem with this whole topic, which is that the kind of things we're discussing are outside the framework of how one discusses economics education from a mainstream perspective. And I mean, this applies at all sorts of levels. However, one of the core concepts in the mainstream is the market. And the fact is that the market for economics education, insofar as it hasn't been put off at the start in the way that's been explained so well already, is expressing a view that they want to be taught about things in a way which the mainstream cannot. And so I know of some universities, one very high curriculum university, which has introduced a history of thought course, for example, because the students demanded it. And the student movement is, I mean, it's so impressive what's been done, and so much of this is a result of what INET's done to support it and foster it, that I think there is scope for focusing on this particular question, actually, of curricular reform and marshalling the students themselves as customers to express their demands to universities. And there are signs that there is a response to that. And particularly when it's possible to demonstrate that there are alternative curricula and alternative approaches there ready to apply.
I'll try to comment on both, because I think both your questions are kind of related. On projects like the core project, or trying to do one coordinated approach, it's a commendable effort, but the problem of designing anything by committee is that you usually end up with something that's neither here nor there. I think it's more probably fruitful in the longer term to be a bit more experimental and see how people design different courses rather than impose it. This is one way we've all agreed on to how to do it. And so I don't think we're at a stage yet where we know exactly how it should be done. So coordination certainly is an important part, and certainly exchanging of ideas and exchanging of approaches. But I'm not yet sure if we've come to the point where we have an idea exactly of how it should be done. And there's going to be disagreements naturally, and it's going to have to balance this different interests. And I'd rather leave that, I think, not rather leave that. I think there should be a coordinated approach. I think all teachers should be involved, particularly from the Global South. Have sort of been left out of this discussion for a lot. It usually tends to happen in Europe and North America. So there's certainly room for coordination, certainly room for collaboration. But the idea that we're going to come up with one curriculum out of this, I'm not so encouraged. I'd rather have 10 different curriculums you can pick and choose from. In terms of power, there is, yes, the orthodoxy is an essential point, and I think education is a weak point that they have. So this is, I think, where it's extremely useful for us to focus on this. Teachers want to teach, students want to learn, and orthodoxy can't stop that. And we can stand before the citadel and demand that they change, or we can encourage the change piecemeal at the college level, at the university level, course by course, how to slowly change. And at some point in time, the orthodoxy will realize they also have to change if they want to continue engaging students, or that students coming out of particular approaches are, in a sense, better trained, or have better understanding than the ones that come out from these narrower curricula. I think it's a long-term project. I don't think it's going to change overnight, but it's a project I think worth doing that will pay off, I think, in the long run.
Thank you, Sheila.
You're muted, Gabriel.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Sheila and Goncalo. We have some questions in the chat. There is one question by Felipe. But Felipe, I think that your question was already responded by
Yes. Yeah.
Goncalo. Yes, because it's about this kind of David and Goliath fight we have with the mainstream. So Leslie Valenza make the following question. In the UK, there has been a movement demanding a change in the curriculum. Nonetheless, it seems that it happened permeated into Latin America. How can we, as young scholars, engage in this change? I think there is no more questions. If someone wants to ask a question, please write in the chat, or I don't see if we can raise our hands here in this Zoom, but the best is just to write down in the chat the question. So I will let Sheila and Goncalo answer to this question: how young scholars, how can young scholars engage in this change? I think part of the answer has been already provided, but I don't know if Sheila and Goncalo would like to add something to their previous.
In a way, this question illustrates the point about context specificity. That, I mean, I find I can't see anything very enlightening not knowing about how universities are organized in Latin America in general, or in specific parts of it. But I mean, my general response would be organize amongst yourselves, talk with sympathetic members of staff, and just try and put as much pressure as you can on universities. But I mean, I realize that power structures work very differently in different institutional arrangements. So I'm sorry, I can't see anything more helpful.
I would agree. The only thing I'd add to this is there are two sides, there are two elements of a young scholar. The young scholar is a consumer in the sense of economics, but he's also a producer. And they will also become teachers soon. And so maintaining a linkage with the young at different levels of scholars, I think, is in remembering your own obligations as teachers when you start teaching, to start being part of being receptive to each other is, I think, an important thing that needs to be maintained, or needs to certainly be fostered. Because a lot of young scholars get this temptation, again, once they graduated and they moved on to start teaching jobs, that they just, that obligation disappears. So maintaining that linkage and keeping the pressure up, both as consumers as students, but also as teachers, to put that pressure also on the administration. This is why I want to teach this course. Would be, I think, useful, I think, in any context, but hopefully maybe in the Latin American context also works as well.
Could I just add to that, you may have heard of this. There's an organization called Reeducating Economics, which is a group of young teachers of economics, some of whom have been through this struggle themselves, trying to figure out how to do economics in the way that we've been discussing, and are now applying it in their teaching. And they've set themselves up to help other people in that same situation. I think it's reteachingeconomics.org, something like that.
Yeah. I would like to add to what Sheila and Goncalo said, that in Latin America we have a few cases, some universities that are already important centers for heterodox economic thinking, or at least pluralistic economic thinking. And we have in Brazil, of course, Unicampi, the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the Federal University of Minas Gerais. There are very good graduate programs in economics, which also have this kind of more open approach to economics. In Buenos Aires, we have now the University General San Martin, which has also a master program bringing these heterodox authors into the curriculum. So I have the impression that in Latin America we are having a change, a move towards the emergence of new programs which are really more open in economics. So there are some encouraging signs, I think, in this region too. I don't know, Leslie, if you are happy with our answer or still. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It was amazing. Thanks.
Okay. So I don't know if there is any other questions. Felipe, I invite you to ask another one from the perspective of the work and the readings you are undertaking now related to philosophy in economics. How could we introduce more of this in our economic courses?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe something I was wondering is that Sheila spoke about a political economy approach, right? But you also pointed out many issues related to moral judgments and moral underpinnings. So could we also speak about moral economy or moral economics? I'm thinking in one of the last books of Samuel Bowles that's called Moral Economy, I think. Or maybe broadly, not just a political economy or a moral economy, but philosophical economy, something like that. I don't know if that exists, but maybe it could be useful.
Are you talking about the terminology that we use?
Yes, the concepts, not just the terms, but the concepts.
Because people use these terms differently, and for some people, philosophical would include economics as a moral science, that would be part of it, and similarly, political economy would include economics as a moral science as part of the conception. But I mean, there's such important layers here, and it depends on the who you're addressing, how you want to put it.
Yes, maybe I'm differentiating the political aspect from the moral aspect. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Because in philosophy, there is a political philosophy and there is a moral philosophy.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yes, I was using the term political economy in the way it's used within economics to sort of imply all these other things, but you're quite right. And language is so difficult because you can imply divisions which are not there, or imply similarities which are not there. And it's not easy to find something that's going to satisfy everyone. I mean, even the term political economy means different things to different people within economics. But so if you can come up with a term that's going to cover everything, that would be absolutely wonderful.
Okay. It seems, Goncalo, that you are in favor of a more kind of guerrilla tactics rather than a full-scale war with the other, one in front of the other. I think that's a very sensible argument. And also, I think it is very congenial with the idea that our discussions have to be context specific. I mean, if we try to bring some kind of new universal heterodox, it could be at odds or in contradiction with our own demand that you have to somehow be very much aware of the differences and specific conditions that students and teachers and economic problems have in each country. So I don't know if there is any other question. I wrote a message for everyone saying, coraje muchachos y muchachas, pueden preguntar, les prometo que están humillados públicamente por eso.
I would like to ask another question if I have permission.
Okay.
How do you see the role of math in economics? Because Goncalo was very clear to me that an excessive influence of math is sometimes a bad thing for many students that don't have this character, you know. But at the same time, math brings order to ideas, and even in post-Keynesian economics is a very math-grounded way of thinking in economics. So how do you see not the relevance, but the scope at which math must be pursued in economics?
Well, my background is actually in mathematical economics. So actually, I was not saying necessarily that math has to be dropped. The issue is adding antidotes and making it that it's not only math, that it's not only technical skills, that there are alternatives, that if you don't particularly have that particular skill, that there's other ways of approaching and entering the field, and other ways to contribute to the field other than that way. So I guess it's more of maybe exploring different ways or showing that there are different ways economics can be researched. I mean, certain insights, you think of things like the Coase theorem, which is a fundamental insight for neoclassical economics. There's no math in there. It was done as a verbal argument. And so there are many insights, and showing that many insights can come that way could be maybe encouraging somebody to say, okay, maybe there's a little, I'm not inclined to math, but I'll still go through it because I can still contribute somewhat, rather than thinking this is simply a math competition.
Yeah, I think I would go further than that. I mean, actually, my background is in pure mathematics as well. I mean, it's actually extraordinary how many people who argue against domination by mathematics started in math. And I mean, I would go further in the sense that I would want to explore with students the limitations of mathematics. I mean, certainly it has all sorts of, I mean, as you say, clarity, internal clarity and consistency in terms of classical logic. But it has its limits in dealing with the real world. And we see this in the discussions about macroeconomics just now and microfoundations. I mean, microfoundations are part of a mathematical project. And yet when it comes to applying macroeconomic theory, you have to drop the microfoundations. So there's, I mean, even within the mainstream, there's clearly a sign of stress about the limitations to to mathematics. And I would go back to Keynes again, who also started in mathematics, actually, in the sense of treatise on probability. But he talked about models as being aids to thought. It was a way of clarifying a bit part of a question, expressing it mathematically, and by doing so abstracting from important aspects of the real world, but keeping these aspects at the back of your head, so that when it comes to addressing a real question, you bring these things back from the back of your head and face up to them and see how they affect the mathematical argument. So math, certainly, if you want, I mean, not all non-mainstream economists want to use maths. I mean, I don't have an objection to it per se, but it's a matter of promoting an understanding of its place, its capabilities, and its limitations.
It's the distortions that is the problem, when it just becomes only that.
Yeah.
Paul Romer has a paper from a couple of years ago called Mathiness. I don't know if you read it, but he also did that point that you both pointed, that there are sometimes some distortions in the use of math, in the sense that there are sometimes done things that are mathematically wrong, but are so sophisticated that very few people could notice that. Maybe that's another thing to consider.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. I could cite some examples, but I'd rather not. But of math mistakes that, I mean, what the math we do is not actually very good math either, but it persists because it's, the mathematician, even if a mathematician corrects it, the economist doesn't necessarily care. But that's, I mean, I guess the point in my mind is there's a space for everything, and I'm not necessarily trying to chase out any approach or saying this is the wrong way to do it. It's just reminding that an economist has to be more than a mathematician. That the mathematics is you can think of mathematics maybe, like when you play music, you have a music score. The music score looks really elaborate. The issue is, what is the sound that's coming out? If the sound is not good, then it's not good economics. And that's what matters, not the page and what it's.
It sounds like it's the title of a paper work that you're going to produce. That's a great idea.
Okay. I think that there are no other questions. So I would like to thank Sheila and Goncalo. I usually say that the life of academics is supply side, not Keynesian, in the sense that there are always a lot of demand. The aggregate demand is very high. Academics are asked to present and to be panelists and teachers in many places every day. There is a lot of requirement for them. So I think it's very generous of you both to having accepted to spend this morning with us and to share with us your thoughts about how we can save economists from their education, from their current education. So thank you very much, and it has been a pleasure. We learned a lot. I hope that our students and the ECLAC colleagues who joined this seminar also took a full advantage of what has been discussed. And that's all. Thank you, and I hope that we can have new opportunities to continue this dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you to all. Bye.
Chao, gracias Felipe, bye bye, gracias Andrea, chao.